The first time Kira felt the flames respond to her will, she was 7 years old and watching the small cottage where she lived with her caretaker burn to ash. She remembered standing in the snow, her bare feet turning numb against the frozen ground, her small fists clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. The fire had started in the hearth, spreading impossibly fast, consuming everything with a hunger that felt almost alive. Old Marin, the human woman who had raised her since. Infancy had pushed Kira outside moments before the roof collapsed, her last words a desperate whisper that Kira never forgot. "Hide what you are. Never let them see the fire. They will kill you for it, child. They will kill you just as they killed your mother." Those words became the chains that bound Kira's power for the next 18 years, keeping the flames locked deep inside her chest where they burned hot and constant. A second heartbeat that never quieted. A rage that never cooled. Now, at 25, Kira had perfected the art of being invisible. She lived on the outskirts of Valdris, the vast kingdom ruled by werewolf clans who had long ago claimed dominance over all supernatural beings in the Northern Territories. Her cottage was small and unremarkable, tucked between the forest and the farmlands where humans worked the soil under the watchful eyes of wolf guards. She made her living as a healer, using herbs and poultices that she gathered from the woods, treating minor ailments and injuries for the humans and the occasional lower-ranking wolf who could not afford the expensive services of the pack healers in the capital. It was simple work, quiet work, the kind of life that drew no attention and asked no questions. But every night, when she was alone and the world was dark and still, Kira would sit by her hearth and let the flames dance across her fingertips, feeling the power pulse through her veins like molten gold, reminding herself that she was not just a nameless orphan surviving on the edges of a world that would never truly accept her. The plague came without warning in the late autumn, when the leaves had turned crimson and gold and the first frost had begun to settle over the land. It started in the outer villages, farmers reporting that their wolf guardians were falling ill with strange symptoms. High fevers that made their skin burn to the touch, convulsions that left them writhing on the ground, black veins spreading across their flesh. Like cracks in porcelain. Within days, the afflicted wolves would slip into a coma from which they never woke, their bodies withering as though something was consuming them from the inside out. The pack healers tried everything, every herb and potion and spell in their considerable arsenal, but nothing worked. The plague spread faster than wildfire, jumping from village to village, from pack to pack, killing indiscriminately regardless of rank or strength. Within 3 weeks, hundreds were dead. And panic began to grip the kingdom like a cold fist around the throat. Kira heard the news from travelers passing through, their faces pale with fear as they spoke of entire packs being decimated, of pyres burning day and night as the bodies of the fallen were consumed by flame. She felt a strange unease settle in her stomach, a whisper of recognition that she could not quite name. There was something about this plague that felt wrong, something that tugged at the edges of her memory like a half-forgotten dream. She began to have nightmares, vivid and terrible, visions of a great temple burning, of people screaming as they were cut down by silver blades, of a woman with hair like spun copper holding a baby wrapped in white cloth. tears streaming down her face as she chanted words in a language Kira did not recognize. The woman's eyes were the same color as Kira's own, a deep amber that seemed to hold flecks of gold. And in the dream, those eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity as the woman whispered a single word. Remember. The Alpha King himself came to the borderlands on a cold morning in early winter, his arrival announced by the thunder of hooves and the howling of wolves. Kira was in her garden, harvesting the last of the frost-resistant herbs before the deep snows came, when she heard the commotion from the village center. Curiosity overcame caution, and she found herself drawn toward the crowd that had gathered in the main square, humans and lower. Ranking wolves alike pressing close to catch a glimpse of the legendary ruler of Valdris. Theron Shadowmere was everything the stories claimed and more. He sat astride a massive black destrier, his broad shoulders wrapped in a cloak of dark fur, his face carved from granite and shadow. He was tall even in the saddle, his presence commanding absolute attention without him having to speak a single word. His hair was midnight black, falling just past his shoulders, and his eyes were a striking, silver that seemed to pierce through everything they touched. But it was not his physical presence that made Kira's breath catch in her throat. It was the power that radiated from him like heat from a forge, raw and primal and barely contained, the unmistakable aura of an alpha in his prime. Theron was addressing the crowd, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily across the square. He spoke of the plague that was ravaging their people, of the healers who had failed to find a cure, of his decision to seek help beyond the traditional bounds of pack medicine. He was offering a substantial reward to anyone who could provide information about alternative treatments, promising safe passage and royal protection to any healer willing to try their skills against this mysterious affliction. Kira should have turned and walked away. Every instinct she had honed over years of hiding screamed at her to go back to her cottage, to lock the door and keep her head down and let someone else take. The risk. But as Theron's silver eyes swept across the crowd, they locked onto hers for a single heartbeat, and something inside her chest ignited. It was not the flames that she had learned to control and suppress. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like recognition, like destiny, like the universe itself had shifted to bring this moment into being. The bond snapped into place between them with the force of a lightning strike, invisible to everyone else but absolutely. Devastating to Kira and Theron both. She watched his entire body go rigid in the saddle, watched his hands tighten on the reins until his knuckles turned white, watched his silver eyes widen with shock and something that looked almost like fear. He felt it too, she realized, with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The mate bond, the legendary connection that tied two souls together across time and space and circumstance, had just activated between a nameless human healer and the most powerful. Alpha in the Northern Territories. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The crowd continued to mill around them, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. Then Theron was swinging down from his horse with fluid grace, his eyes never leaving hers as he crossed the space between them with long strides. When he stood before her, Kira had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, and up close, she could see the fine lines of stress around his eyes, the exhaustion that clung to him. like a second skin, the weight of responsibility that bowed his shoulders despite his strength. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough that only she could hear, rough with an emotion she could not name. You feel it. It was not a question. Kira's throat was dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She should deny it. She should lie and walk away and never look back. But something about the raw honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability he was showing her despite the crowd of onlookers, made the truth spill from her lips before she could stop it. Yes, I feel it. Theron closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was a resolve there that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Come with me. I need your help. Not as my mate, not yet, but as a healer. Whatever you are, whatever you can do, my people need it. They are dying, and I am running out of options and out of time. Please. The desperation in that single word, coming from a man who commanded armies and ruled a kingdom, shattered something inside Kira's carefully constructed walls. She found herself nodding before she had consciously made the decision, found herself agreeing to pack a bag and leave the only home she had known for years to follow a stranger who was somehow not a stranger at all into a world that had always existed just beyond her reach. Within an hour, she was riding behind Theron on his massive horse, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from sliding off. Her bag of herbs and healing supplies tied to the saddle. She could feel the heat of his body through the thick layers of clothing, could feel the way his muscles tensed and relaxed with each movement of the horse, could feel the bond between them humming with an energy that made her skin tingle and her flames stir restlessly beneath her control. He did not speak during the journey to the capital, and neither did she. Both of them lost in their own thoughts about what this impossible connection might mean and what dangers it might bring. The capital city of Valdris was a sprawling metropolis built into the side of a mountain, its streets winding upward in concentric circles toward the massive stone palace that crowned the peak. Everywhere Kira looked, she saw wolves. They walked the streets in their human forms, tall and powerful and radiating confidence, their eyes flashing with inner light as they went about their business. She saw elegant shops selling weapons and armor, taverns, that echoed with raucous laughter, training yards where young wolves sparred with terrifying speed and strength. It was overwhelming and intimidating, and utterly foreign to someone who had spent her entire life on the margins of this society. When they finally reached the palace, Theron led her not to the grand public halls, but to a private wing reserved for the royal family, his hand light on the small of her back as he guided her through corridors lined with ancient tapestries and lit by torches that burned with silvery flame. He brought her to a chamber that was clearly meant for guests of importance, spacious and elegantly furnished with a large bed, piled high with furs, a sitting area near a stone fireplace, and windows that overlooked the city below. Theron dismissed the servants who tried to follow them inside, closing the door firmly and leaning against it with a heaviness that spoke of exhaustion that went bone deep. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his silver eyes roaming over her face as though trying to memorize every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with honesty that felt like a gift and a burden all at once. I did not expect this. I did not expect you. The mate bond is supposed to be sacred, unchangeable, the will of the moon goddess herself. But the timing of this is catastrophic. There are things about my family, about the history of this kingdom, that you do not know. Things that would put you in terrible danger if the wrong. People learned what you are to me. Kira set her bag down on the table, her own exhaustion making her limbs feel heavy. What makes you think I am anything more than a simple healer? What makes you think there is anything about me that could possibly matter to your kingdom's politics? Theron moved away from the door, closing the distance between them until he stood close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his silver eyes, close enough that his scent surrounded her, pine and smoke and... something wild and untamed. Because I felt your power the moment our eyes met. Because I have spent my entire life studying the old texts and the forbidden histories, and I know the signature of ancient magic when I encounter it. Because when you looked at me in that village square, your eyes flashed gold for just a fraction of a second, and that particular shade of gold has not been seen in this kingdom for 200 years. You are not human, Kira. You never were. And if I am right about what you truly are, then everything I thought I knew about the past, about my family's legacy, about this plague that is killing my people, might be based on lies. The words hit Kira like physical blows, each one landing with devastating accuracy on truths she had spent her entire life running from. Her hands began to shake, and she clenched them into fists, feeling the familiar heat building in her palms, the flames threatening to break free of her control. No, you are wrong. I am nobody. I am... nothing. I'm just a healer who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Theron reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and caught one of her hands in his much larger one. His touch was warm, his palm calloused from years of wielding weapons, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity through the mate bond that made them both gasp. Let me see. Please. Show me what you have been hiding all these years. Trust me. Even though you have no reason to, even though we are strangers. Bound by fate. Let me help you understand what you are, because I think you might be the key to saving my people and confronting the darkest chapter of my kingdom's history. Something about the gentleness in his voice, the lack of demand or expectation, made the walls Kira had built around herself begin to crack. She took a shaky breath and stopped fighting the flames. She let them rise to the surface, let them flow through her veins and pool in her palm, where Theron held her hand. Golden fire. Bloomed between their joined hands, dancing and flickering, but generating no heat, no pain, only a soft, warm light that illuminated their faces in the dimness of the chamber. The flames were beautiful, ethereal, nothing like the destructive force that Kira had always feared they might become. They moved with a consciousness of their own, wrapping around Theron's wrist like a gentle caress, as though testing him, assessing him, deciding whether he was worthy of their trust. Theron's expression shifted through shock, wonder, and something that looked almost like grief as he watched the golden flames dance across his skin. Ancient fire, the gift of the elementals, the people we called the Ancients. His voice was barely above a whisper, thick with emotion that made his accent more pronounced. My grandfather helped lead the campaign that exterminated them 2 centuries ago, claiming they were a threat to wolf supremacy, that their power made them dangerous and unpredictable. The official, Histories say that every last one of them was killed, that their bloodline was wiped from existence to ensure that wolves would remain the dominant supernatural force in these lands. But if you carry their fire, if you are here and alive and standing in front of me, then everything I was taught about that genocide was a lie. They did not kill all of them. Someone survived. Someone hid. Someone kept the bloodline alive despite every effort to destroy it. Kira pulled her hand back, extinguishing. The flames with an effort that made her chest ache. The implications of what Theron was saying crashed over her like a tidal wave, rearranging everything she thought she knew about herself, about her past, about the nightmares that had haunted her for as long as she could remember. If what you are saying is true, if I really am descended from these ancients, then your people murdered my family. Your grandfather participated in genocide. And now you want me to help you save the very wolves who... destroyed my bloodline? The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself, and she saw Theron flinch as though she had struck him. But he did not look away, did not make excuses, did not try to minimize the weight of what his family had done. Yes, that is exactly what I am asking. Because I have spent the last 10 years of my reign trying to undo the damage my ancestors caused, trying to build a kingdom based on justice rather than supremacy, trying to atone for sins that I did not commit, but that I inherited nonetheless. Because this plague that is killing my people might be connected to the massacre of yours, might be some kind of curse or punishment left behind by the dying ancients. And because despite the terrible history between our peoples, despite every reason you have to hate me and everything I represent, the mate bond has tied us together. The moon goddess does not make mistakes. If she chose to bind us, there must be a reason, a purpose that transcends our individual pain. And anger. Help me find it. Help me understand what is happening to my kingdom. And I swear to you, on my honor as Alpha King, that I will give you the truth about what happened to your people, no matter how ugly that truth might be. The sincerity in his voice, the raw vulnerability he was showing her, made something in Kira's chest loosen despite her anger and fear. She thought about the plague victims she had heard described, about the black veins and the withering bodies, and the way nothing seemed to stop the progression of the disease. She thought about her nightmares, about the temple burning and the woman with copper hair chanting in an unknown language. She thought about Marin's dying words, the warning to hide what she was, the implication that her mother had been killed for the power she carried. If there was even a chance that Theron was right, that this plague was somehow connected to the genocide of her people, then she had a responsibility to try to stop it. Not for the wolves who had destroyed her bloodline, but for the innocent people who were dying now, centuries later, for crimes they had not committed. Show me the victims. Let me examine them, try to understand what is happening to them. But I want something in return. I want access to your archives, to the forbidden histories you mentioned, to every record and document and testimony about the massacre of the ancients. I want the truth, all of it, no matter how terrible. And if I help you stop this plague, if I use my power to save your people, then you will help me find out who I really am and what happened to my family. Theron's expression shifted into something that looked like relief, mixed with determination. He extended his hand, not to shake, but palm up, an offer and a promise. Deal. I will give you everything I have, every resource at my disposal, every secret that has been locked away in the royal vaults. But I need you to understand something, Kira. There are members of my council, powerful alphas who advise me, who still believe that the ancients were a threat that needed to be eliminated. If they discover what you are, they will see you as an enemy, a danger to be neutralized. I can protect you to a degree, but only if you stay close to me, only if you let me shield you with my authority and my position. The mate bond will help with that. It will make it harder for them to move against you without directly challenging me. Kira took his hand, feeling the warmth of his. Palm against hers, feeling the bond between them strengthen and solidify with the contact. Then, I suppose we had better make this convincing. If anyone asks, I am your mate, discovered in the borderlands and brought here to help with the plague. Nothing more, nothing less. No mention of my powers or my heritage until we know more about who we can trust. Theron's lips curved into a small smile, the first hint of warmth she had seen from him since they met. That is assuming anyone will believe. That the Alpha King found his fated mate in a human healer living on the edges of his kingdom. The stories write themselves, do they not? Tragic and romantic and just believable enough to provide cover while we investigate the real mysteries. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that was both courtly and intimate, and Kira felt heat flood through her that had nothing to do with the flames in her veins. Before you say yes to anything else, you should know. The kind of person I have to become before I take you further into my life and my world. If you are asking me to trust you, then I must show you something few people ever see. Something that has been a secret my entire life. A secret that connects directly to the history between our peoples. Theron moved to the fireplace and pressed a hidden mechanism in the stonework. A section of the wall swung open, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. This leads to a private vault beneath. The palace. A place where my family has kept records that were deemed too dangerous for public consumption. Documents about the ancients, about the real reasons for the genocide, about the powers they possessed and the knowledge they guarded. I have spent years trying to piece together the truth from those fragmented accounts. Now, with you here, we might finally be able to understand what really happened and why this plague feels like an echo of that ancient violence. Kira followed Theron into the passage, the walls closing behind them with a soft click that made her heart race. The descent was steep, and the air grew colder with each step, until finally they emerged into a circular chamber carved from solid rock. The walls were lined with shelves containing leather-bound books and scrolls sealed with wax, and in the center of the room stood a stone pedestal holding a single object. It was a crystal sphere about the size of a human head, shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with a faint inner light. The moment Kira laid eyes on it, her flames responded, surging through her body with such force that she gasped and stumbled. Theron caught her before she could fall, his arms strong and steady around her waist, and she felt his heart hammering against her back as he held her. What is that thing? Why does it make my power react like that? Her voice came out breathless, strained, and she could feel the flames dancing just beneath her skin, desperate to break free, to reach. toward the crystal as though drawn by an irresistible magnetism. Theron's voice was grim as he answered, his breath warm against her ear. That is the heart of elements, the source of the ancients' power. According to the records, it was taken from their temple on the night of the massacre, kept as a trophy and a safeguard against any survivors who might try to reclaim their heritage. The official story says, it is just a relic, a pretty bauble with no real power. But I have always suspected that was a lie. I have spent nights down here, studying it, feeling the energy it radiates, wondering what would happen if someone with the right bloodline actually touched it. Now you are here, and I think we are about to find out. Kira tried to pull away, tried to resist the pull of the crystal, but it was like fighting against a riptide. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her forward until she stood directly in front of the pedestal. The gold veins in the crystal pulsed faster. Brighter, matching the rhythm of her own heartbeat, and she could hear something whispering at the edges of her consciousness, words in a language she should not understand, but somehow did. Remember, awaken, reclaim. Her hand reached out without her conscious decision, her fingertips brushing against the smooth surface of the crystal, and the world exploded into gold and fire and searing, overwhelming sensation. She felt herself falling backward but never hit the ground, suspended in a space between reality and memory as visions crashed through her mind with devastating clarity. She saw the temple as it had been 200 years ago, magnificent and sprawling, built of white stone that gleamed in the sunlight, surrounded by gardens where fire and water and earth and air danced in perfect harmony under the guidance of the ancients. She saw her people, beautiful and powerful and diverse, their eyes glowing with elemental energy as they worked their magic, maintaining the balance. Between the supernatural realms, serving as mediators and scholars and guardians of knowledge that predated even the oldest wolf clans. She saw the night when the wolves came, hundreds of them led by alphas drunk on the promise of supremacy, burning and killing and destroying everything in their path. She saw the desperate last stand of the elementals, saw them fighting with fire and lightning and stone, saw them dying as silver weapons found their hearts and throats. And she saw the woman from her nightmares, the one with copper hair and amber eyes, saw her standing in the innermost chamber of the temple with a baby wrapped in white cloth, saw her weaving a spell of concealment and protection, even as blood poured from wounds in her chest and stomach. The woman's voice echoed through the vision, clear and strong despite her approaching death. You are the last, my daughter. The last of the royal bloodline. The last who carries the full power of all 4 elements in her veins. I hide you. Now with magic that will erase your memories, that will make you appear human, that will keep you safe until the time is right for you to awaken. But know this, my precious child. This atrocity will not go unpunished. I lay upon these wolves a curse born of our dying rage, a plague that will sleep for 200 years and then awaken to test whether they have learned anything from their genocide. Only when one of their kind joins with one of ours in true partnership, only when justice and truth are chosen over power and domination, can the curse be lifted. You are my hope, my legacy, my revenge and my redemption all bound into one small life. Survive, my daughter. Remember, and when the time comes, choose wisely whether to save them or let them reap what they have sown. Kira came back to herself with a scream, collapsing fully into Theron's arms as the visions released their grip on her mind. She was sobbing, great wrenching sobs that tore through her chest, mourning for a mother she never knew, for a people she never got to meet, for a heritage that was stolen from her before she could even understand what she had lost. Theron held her tightly, lowering them both to the floor, rocking her gently as she cried, his own face wet with tears that he did not bother to hide. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what my family did to yours. I am so sorry that you had to see that alone. I am so sorry that this is the legacy I have to offer you." His voice was broken, raw with guilt and grief that went beyond anything she had expected from him. When Kira finally had enough control to speak, her voice was hoarse and shaking. "The plague is not just a disease. It is a curse. My mother laid it on your people with her dying breath, designed to activate 2 centuries later as a test. She wanted to see if the wolves would still choose violence and supremacy, or if time had taught them compassion and justice. And the only way to lift it is for one of your kind and one of mine to join together in true partnership, to prove that coexistence is possible. The mate bond between us is not an accident, Theron. It is part of her spell, part of her plan. We are the test subjects, the ones who will determine whether your entire species deserves to survive, or whether they should pay for the genocide with extinction." Theron pulled back enough to look at her face, his silver eyes intense and searching. "Then tell me what you need. Tell me what we have to do to prove ourselves worthy, to lift this curse and save my people. Because I meant what I said before. I have spent a decade trying to build a better kingdom, trying to create systems based on equality and justice rather than strength and domination. I cannot undo what my ancestors did, but I can make sure that their mistakes are never repeated. I can give you a voice in my council, can use my authority to expose the truth about the genocide, can work to create a place where elementals would be welcomed and protected if any others have survived in hiding. But none of that matters if we do not stop this plague first. How do we break the curse?" Kira closed her eyes, reaching for the knowledge that the heart of elements had awakened in her, sifting through memories and powers that were both intimately familiar and utterly foreign. The curse is tied to the balance between our peoples. For 200 years, wolves have held all the power, all the authority, all the resources. The plague feeds on that imbalance, on the injustice that was never addressed or corrected. To break it, we need to do more than just acknowledge what happened. We need to create real systemic change. We need to bring the truth into the light, hold those responsible accountable even if they are long dead, and rebuild the structures of power so that they no longer enable genocide. And we need to do it publicly, before your entire council and your people, so that everyone witnesses the commitment to change. The curse will sense whether our intentions are genuine or performative. There is no faking this, no taking shortcuts. Either we transform the foundation of your kingdom, or everyone afflicted by the plague will die. The weight of that responsibility settled over them both like a physical burden. Theron stood slowly, helping Kira to her feet, and she was surprised by how steady she felt despite everything that had just happened. The knowledge from the heart of elements was integrating itself. into her consciousness, showing her how to access powers she never knew she had, teaching her the techniques her mother and grandmother and countless ancestors had used to manipulate fire and air and water and earth. She was no longer a frightened orphan hiding her abilities. She was the last of the elemental royal line, heir to a legacy of power and wisdom that predated the wolf kingdoms by millennia. That transformation should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like coming home, like finally understanding the shape of the space she was meant to fill in the world. We start with the council. Tomorrow I will call an emergency session and tell them everything. The truth about the genocide, about the curse, about you and who you really are. Some of them will resist, will argue that the old ways were justified, that acknowledging the atrocity makes us look weak. But others, the younger alphas who have grown tired of the supremacist rhetoric, will support us. We will have to be strategic, present evidence that cannot be denied, make it clear that the plague is divine justice for crimes that were never properly addressed. And then we begin the real work of reformation, changing laws and redistributing resources and creating protections for any non-wolves within our borders. Theron was already moving into his alpha mode, his mind clearly racing through logistics and political calculations. And Kira felt a surge of respect for his willingness to throw himself fully into this fight. But there is something else we need to address first. If we are going to do this, if we are going to stand before your council and your kingdom as proof that wolves and elementals can work together, then we need to actually explore what this mate bond means. We need to trust each other completely, need to be able to communicate without words when necessary, need to present a united front that no one can question or divide. That means being vulnerable with each other in ways that go beyond political alliances. Kira's words hung in the air between them, charged with implications that made her pulse quicken. She saw understanding dawn in Theron's eyes, saw him nod slowly as he accepted the necessity of what she was proposing. The mate bond is not just a political convenience. It is supposed to be a sacred union, a melding of souls that makes two people stronger together than they ever could be apart. If we are going to use it as the foundation for breaking this curse, then we need to honor it properly, need to let it develop naturally, even as we navigate the crisis around us. Theron stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. I have been alone for a very long time, Kira. I have had lovers but never a mate, have carried the weight of leadership without anyone to truly share it with. I will not lie and say this is easy for me, opening myself to someone I barely know, trusting in a bond that was forged by forces beyond our control. But I want to try. For my people, yes. But also for you. Because even in the few hours since we met, I have seen your strength and your compassion, and your unwillingness to back down from hard truths. You deserve better than a mate who only sees you as a means to an end. Kira leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his hands against her skin, feeling the mate bond humming with approval at their closeness. Then let us make a deal. We face the council tomorrow. We tell them the truth, and we begin the work of reformation together. But tonight, we take time for ourselves. Time to explore this connection, without the weight of kingdoms and curses and genocides pressing down on us. Tonight, We are just two people trying to understand what fate has decided for us. Is that acceptable to you, Alpha King?" A smile tugged at the corners of Theron's mouth, softening the harsh planes of his face. "My name is Theron. Just Theron when we are alone. And yes, that is more than." "Acceptable. That is perfect." He led her back up through the hidden passage and into the guest chamber, closing the secret door behind them. The room felt different now, charged with possibility and anticipation, and Kira found herself nervous in a way that had nothing to do with curses or politics. Theron moved around the room, lighting candles with a flint striker, the soft golden glow creating an intimate atmosphere that made her breath catch. When he returned to stand before her, he was quieter, more uncertain than she had seen him all day, and that vulnerability made him infinitely more attractive than all his alpha power and authority. "I need you to know that I have never done this before. I have never had a mate, never experienced a bond like this. I do not know what I am doing beyond following instinct and hoping that is enough." Kira reached for his hands, threading her fingers through his, feeling the spark of connection that ran through every point of contact. "Neither." "Have I? So I suppose we will figure it out together, make mistakes and learn from them and build something that belongs entirely to us." She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, tentative and questioning, giving him every opportunity to pull back if he wanted to. But Theron did not pull back. Instead, he made a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss, his arms coming around her waist to pull her flush against his body. The mate bond sang between them, amplifying every sensation. Until Kira felt like she might burst from the intensity of it. This was not the practiced seduction of experienced lovers. This was raw and honest and overwhelming. Two souls recognizing each other and reaching out across the space that had separated them for far too long. They moved to the bed in a tangle of hands and mouths and shed clothing, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with reverent touches and whispered questions. Theron was careful with her, always checking that she was comfortable, always making sure she wanted each new intimacy before proceeding, and that gentleness undid her more than any display of dominance could have. She traced the scars that marked his chest and arms, evidence of battles fought and survived, and he kissed the faint burn mark on her shoulder that she had carried since childhood, the place where the flames had first manifested and marked her as different. When they finally came together, it was with a synchronization that felt destined. Their bodies moving in perfect rhythm as the mate bond flared bright and hot between them, sealing their connection in a way that transcended the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs, Kira's head resting on Theron's chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare back. For the first time since Marin's death, Kira felt truly safe, truly seen, truly accepted for everything she was, including the dangerous power that thrummed through her veins. Theron's voice was drowsy, but content, when he finally spoke. "Thank you for giving this a chance, for not letting the sins of my family destroy something that could be beautiful. I know we have an impossible task ahead of us. I know that there will be people who try to tear us apart, who see you as a threat rather than a gift. But I swear to you, Kira, I will fight for you with everything I have. I will remake this kingdom into something worthy of you. Or I will die trying." Kira lifted her head to look at him, seeing. The determination in his silver eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of unshakable resolve. And I swear to you that I will use every ounce of my power to break this curse, to save your people even though they do not deserve it, because you have shown me that not all wolves are monsters, because you have given me hope that maybe, just maybe, the future does not have to be defined by the mistakes of the past. They sealed those promises with another kiss, and then drifted off to sleep in each. Others' arms, fortified by their connection, and ready to face whatever battles awaited them when the sun rose. If you are enjoying this story of supernatural politics and fated love, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment about whether you think Kira and Theron can actually break the curse and reform an entire kingdom. Your support helps us create more content like this, diving deep into complex worlds where romance and justice intertwine. Thathawain. Emergency council session the next morning was tense from the moment Theron called it into order. Kira sat at his right hand, dressed in a gown of deep crimson that had been sent to her chamber by servants who clearly understood the message Theron was trying to send. She was no longer a simple healer from the borderlands. She was the Alpha King's mate, and her position at the table was a statement of her authority and importance. The council chamber was a circular room with a domed ceiling. The walls carved with scenes from wolf history. 12 seats ringed the main table, occupied by the most powerful alphas from across the kingdom, men and women whose families had held influence for generations. They were all staring at Kira with varying degrees of suspicion, curiosity, and hostility, clearly wondering what qualified a nameless human to sit among them. Theron stood, his presence commanding immediate silence. He did not waste time with pleasantries or easing into difficult topics. I have called this emergency session because the plague ravaging our people is not a natural disease. It is a curse, laid upon us 200 years ago by the elementals we massacred, designed to activate now as divine justice for a genocide that was never acknowledged or atoned for. The woman sitting beside me is not human. She is the last surviving member of the elemental royal bloodline, hidden and protected by magic since infancy. She is also my fated mate, recognized by the moon goddess. Herself, and she is the key to breaking the curse and saving everyone afflicted by this plague. But lifting the curse requires more than just acknowledging these facts. It requires genuine, systemic transformation of the foundations of our kingdom. The explosion of outrage was immediate and deafening. Alphas leaped to their feet, shouting over each other, demanding proof and explanations, and calling Theron a fool for bringing an enemy into their midst. But one voice cut through the chaos, cold. And calculating, and laced with thinly veiled threat. Alpha Moravin, an older man with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of ice, stood slowly from his seat at the far end of the table. The elementals were exterminated because they refused to acknowledge wolf supremacy, because they hoarded knowledge and power that rightfully belonged to all supernatural beings. To suggest that their genocide was unjust is to spit on the graves of your own ancestors, including your grandfather, who led that. Glorious campaign. And you would have us believe that this convenient mate of yours, discovered at the exact moment we face this crisis, is somehow the solution? Forgive me, my king, but this reeks of manipulation and desperation. Kira felt Theron's hand close around hers under the table, squeezing gently, giving her silent permission and encouragement. She stood, calling on the power that the heart of elements had awakened, letting her eyes glow with golden fire as she addressed the council. You want proof? Allow me to provide it. She raised her free hand and called the flames to the surface, not small candle flickers, but a conflagration that filled the air above the table, golden and beautiful and utterly controlled. The council members stumbled backward, hands going to weapons that would be useless against elemental magic, and Kira let them feel a fraction of the fear her people must have experienced when the wolves came to slaughter them. This is the power your ancestors tried. To destroy. This is what they killed women and children to prevent from existing. But you failed. One survived. I survived. And now your own moon goddess has bound me to your king, because she understands what your genocidal forebears did not. We are stronger together than we ever could be apart. She let the flames dissipate slowly, returning to her seat with deliberate calm. Theron took over, his voice brooking no argument. I have spent the night reviewing the historical records kept in the royal vaults, documents that were sealed away because they contradicted the official narrative. The elementals were not hoarding power. They were maintaining balance, preventing any one supernatural faction from dominating the others. They were scholars and diplomats and healers, not the threats they were painted to be. My grandfather and his allies wanted absolute control, and the elementals stood in their way, so they manufactured justifications for mass murder. That is the truth we have never faced, the sin that has poisoned our kingdom for 2 centuries. And now we are paying the price for that willful ignorance. Alpha Moravan's expression was thunderous, his voice dripping with disdain. Even if we accept your revisionist history, even if we acknowledge that perhaps the elementals were treated more harshly than necessary, what exactly are you proposing we do about it? We cannot bring back the dead. We cannot undo centuries of established power structures. Are you suggesting we simply hand over control of our kingdom to appease a curse laid by bitter, dying elementals? Because I assure you, the majority of this council will not support such cowardice. Theron's eyes flashed silver, his alpha power rippling through the room in a wave that made even Moravan take a step back. I am not proposing we hand over control. I am proposing we share it, as we should have been doing all along. I am proposing we pass legislation that protects non-wolf supernaturals, that creates representation for communities we have marginalized, that redistributes resources more equitably. I am proposing we formally acknowledge the genocide, create memorials for those who were killed, and compensate any descendants who come forward. And I am proposing that we allow Kira to use her power to attempt to heal those afflicted by the plague, starting immediately, as proof that elementals are allies rather than enemies. The debate raged for hours. The council split almost evenly between those who supported Theron's reforms and those who clung to the old supremacist ideologies. Kira watched the proceedings with growing respect for Theron's political acumen as he systematically dismantled every argument against change, using logic and evidence and appeals to self-interest to win over the undecided alphas. He made it clear that the plague would kill them all if they did nothing, that this was not about morality alone, but survival. He promised positions and influence to those who supported him, and made thinly veiled threats about the consequences of opposition to those who resisted. By the time the sun began to set outside the chamber windows, he had secured a narrow majority in favor of beginning the reform process. The vote was called, and when the results were tallied, Theron had won by a margin of 7-5. It was not the unanimous support he might have hoped for, but it was enough to move forward. Alpha Moravin stood once more, his expression carefully neutral. Despite the fury Kira could see simmering beneath the surface, "I will abide by the Council's decision, as is proper. But I want it noted that I believe this is a mistake that will have consequences none of us can predict. We are setting precedents that undermine centuries of tradition based on the word of one elemental and the theories of a king whose judgment may be compromised by the mate bond. I hope for all our sakes that I am wrong." With that, he swept from the chamber, taking 2 of his allied alphas with him. Theron watched them go with an expression that mingled relief and wariness. He knows he has lost this battle, but is already planning his next move. Moravin is not someone who accepts defeat gracefully. We will need to watch him carefully, make sure he does not try to undermine the reforms, or worse, move against you directly. Kira nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. For now, though, we have permission to begin. Take me to the plague victims. Let me see if my power can do what the curse demands, if healing the wounds between our peoples can also heal the disease itself. Theron gathered a group of trusted guards and healers, and together they made their way to the quarantine wing of the palace infirmary, where the most severe cases were being housed. The smell hit Kira first, the sickly sweet scent of bodies slowly shutting down, of flesh that was dying from the inside out. The victims lay in rows of beds, their skin covered in those terrible black, veins, their breathing shallow and labored. The pack healers had done everything they could to make them comfortable, but there was nothing in their arsenal that could halt the progression of the curse. Kira approached the first bed, where a young male wolf lay unconscious, his face gaunt and his body wasted to nearly skeletal proportions. She placed her hands on his chest, closing her eyes and reaching for the knowledge the Heart of Elements had given her, searching for the threads of the curse that bound him. She found them quickly, dark tendrils of magic woven through his very essence, feeding on his life force like parasites. They were tied to the original curse her mother had laid, but they had taken on a life of their own over the centuries, becoming more than just punishment. They were a test, a barrier that could only be lifted through genuine healing on both sides. Kira called her flames to the surface, but these were different from the destructive fire she had feared as a child. These flames were golden and gentle, warm with compassion, rather than hot with rage. She let them flow into the young wolf, seeking out each dark tendril and burning it away with careful precision, replacing the curse magic with her own healing energy. The process was exhausting, requiring intense concentration and a steady drain on her power reserves. But slowly, incredibly, she watched the black veins begin to fade from the wolf's skin, watched color return to his face, watched his breathing deepen and stabilize. The pack healers gasped and crowded closer, murmuring amongst themselves as they witnessed magic they had never imagined possible. Kira moved to the next bed, and then the next, working her way through the quarantine wing with Theron at her side. lending her his strength through the mate bond whenever she began to falter. By the time she finished with the last patient, dawn was breaking outside, and she was swaying on her feet, utterly depleted. But every single victim was healing. The curse lifted from their bodies through the combination of elemental power and the genuine commitment to change that Theron had demonstrated before the council. Theron caught her before she collapsed, sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her back to his private chambers. He laid her gently on his bed and used a damp cloth to wipe the sweat from her face, his expression filled with awe and concern. "You did it. You actually broke the curse. Every single one of them is going to survive because of you." Kira managed a weak smile, too tired to do much more than whisper. "Not because of me alone. Because we did it together. Because you were willing to stand before your council and admit that your kingdom was built on genocide. Because you started the process of making real amends. The curse recognized that, responded to the sincerity of the commitment. But this is only the beginning, Theron. Healing those people was the proof of concept. Now comes the hard part. Actually following through on all the promises you made, transforming the structures of power while dealing with people like Moraven, who will fight us every step of the way." Theron stretched out beside her on the bed, pulling her close so that her head rested on his chest. "Then we will face those challenges together, as mates and as partners. I meant every word I said to that council. I will remake this kingdom into something worthy of you, something that honors the memory of your people rather than trying to bury the truth of what happened to them. And I will make sure that you have the support and resources you need, not just to survive, but to thrive, to rediscover your heritage, and rebuild what was lost. You are not alone anymore, Kira. You have me, and together, we are going to change the world." Kira let herself relax into his embrace, let herself believe in the possibility of a future where wolves and elementals coexisted in genuine partnership. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks and opposition, and moments when the weight of history threatened to crush them. But they had already proven that change was possible, that the sins of the past did not have to define the shape of the future. Over the following weeks and months, Theron proved as good as his word. He pushed through legislation that created legal protections for non-wolf supernaturals, established councils where marginalized communities had real representation and decision-making power, and ordered the construction of a massive memorial complex dedicated to the elemental victims of the genocide. He opened the royal archives to scholars from all backgrounds, encouraging research into the true history of the massacre and supporting the publication of findings, even when they painted his ancestors in a terrible light. He redistributed resources that had been hoarded by wolf packs for centuries, ensuring that all communities within Valdris had access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. And he did all of this while facing fierce resistance from traditionalists who saw every reform as an erosion of their rightful dominance. Alpha Moraven remained the loudest voice of opposition, using his influence to slow progress wherever possible. But even he could not deny the evidence that Theron's reforms were making the kingdom stronger and more stable. The plague did not return. New cases stopped appearing once the first victims were healed, and those who had been cured began spreading word about the elemental who had saved them with golden fire. Opinion began to shift, especially among the younger generation of wolves who had no personal investment in maintaining the old hierarchies. Kira became a figure of fascination and respect, no longer hiding her power, but using it openly to help those in need, teaching healing techniques to pack physicians and slowly building bridges between communities that had been separated by centuries of hostility. The mate bond. Between Kira and Theron deepened with each passing day, their connection growing from initial attraction and political necessity into genuine love forged through shared struggle and mutual respect. They learned to communicate without words when necessary, their minds touching through the bond in moments of crisis, their strengths complementing each other in ways that made them far more effective as a team than either could have been alone. Theron taught Kira about leadership and political strategy, about the delicate balance between idealism and pragmatism that was required to create lasting change. Kira taught Theron about compassion and the importance of listening to voices that had been silenced, about using power to uplift rather than dominate. Together they became symbols of a new Valdris, proof that the old divisions did not have to be permanent, that healing was possible even for the deepest wounds. On the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting, Theron organized a formal ceremony in the ruins of the old elemental temple, which had been preserved as part of the memorial complex. He invited representatives from every community in Valdris, from the highest-ranking alphas to farmers and merchants and healers who had never been included in royal proceedings before. Kira stood beside him as he addressed the assembled crowd, speaking words that had been prepared carefully, but which came from genuine conviction. 1 year ago, I met my mate in a borderlands village, and that meeting changed everything I thought I knew about my kingdom and my responsibilities as its leader. I learned that we had built our prosperity on genocide, that we had maintained our power through systematic oppression, and that we had refused to acknowledge or atone for sins that cried out for justice. Today, standing in the ruins of a temple my grandfather helped destroy, I formally apologize on behalf of the wolf clans of Valdris for the massacre of the elementals too. "100 years ago. No apology can bring back the dead or undo the trauma that was inflicted. But I hope this acknowledgement, combined with the reforms we have implemented and will continue to implement, demonstrates our commitment to building a future where such atrocities can never happen again." Kira added her own words, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "My mother laid a curse on the wolves as she died, a test to see if time and suffering would teach lessons that compassion alone could not. That curse has been lifted because this kingdom chose change over stubbornness, chose justice over convenience, chose to build something new rather than defend something rotten. But the real work is not breaking curses or healing plague victims. The real work is the daily choice to treat each other with dignity, to share power and resources equitably, to listen to voices that have been ignored, and to recognize that our differences make us stronger when we embrace them rather than trying to eliminate them. I stand here today, not as the last elemental, but as the first of what I hope will be many who find a home in this kingdom, who contribute their gifts and knowledge to building something that none of us could create alone. The crowd's response was not unanimous. Some remained skeptical or hostile, their faces set in hard lines of disapproval. But others were moved, some to tears, and the applause that eventually rose was genuine and sustained. Kira saw young wolves standing beside human merchants, saw former traditionalists nodding thoughtfully, saw children of various supernatural species playing together without fear or prejudice. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was profoundly better than what had come before. And that was enough to give her hope that the future she and Theron were building might actually endure. That night, after all the ceremonies and speeches and political maneuvering were done, Kira and Theron returned to their private chambers and simply held each other, drawing strength and comfort from the bond that had brought them together and sustained them through the hardest year of both their lives. Theron's voice was soft against her hair, filled with wonder and contentment. A year ago, I thought my greatest achievement would be maintaining stability and preventing my kingdom from fracturing. I never imagined I would find a mate who would challenge me to be better, who would force me to confront uncomfortable truths, who would give me the courage to attempt the impossible. You have changed me, Kira. You have changed this entire kingdom. And I am grateful every single day for whatever twist of fate brought you into my life. Kira tilted her head up to kiss him, pouring all her love and trust and hope into that simple gesture. And you have given me something I thought was lost forever. A family. A purpose. A place where I do not have to hide what I am. You took the scared orphan from the borderlands and showed her that she was always meant for more, that her power was not a curse to be hidden, but a gift to be shared. Whatever challenges we face going forward, whatever resistance we encounter, we will face it together. Because that is what mates do. That is what partners do. We build something better than what we inherited, and we protect it with everything we have. They made love slowly and tenderly, reaffirming their bond in the most fundamental way, and afterward they lay tangled together in contentment, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other what they had both been searching for their entire lives. The epilogue to their story came 5 years later, when Kira stood on the balcony of the palace overlooking a city that had been transformed by their efforts. The streets were filled with people of all supernatural species, moving freely and peacefully, trading goods and ideas and building connections that would have been unthinkable a decade before. The memorial complex had become a center of learning, attracting scholars from across the known world who came to study the history of the elementals and the lessons that could be learned from their destruction and eventual restoration. New laws protected the rights of all residents regardless of species, and councils representing diverse communities had real power to shape policy and allocate resources. It was not paradise. There were still tensions, still disagreements, still people. Who longed for the simpler certainties of the old hierarchies. But it was progress, real and measurable and hopeful. Theron joined her on the balcony, their 3-year-old daughter perched on his shoulders, giggling as he pretended to almost drop her before catching her securely. Their daughter had inherited Kira's amber eyes and Theron's black hair, and she possessed abilities that neither of them fully understood yet. A fusion of wolf strength and elemental magic that promised to be extraordinary as she grew. She was living proof that the future did not have to be limited by the divisions of the past, that new combinations were possible, that change and adaptation could create something beautiful. Kira reached up to touch her daughter's small hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, feeling the pulse of power that ran through her young veins, and she thought about the woman in her visions, the mother she never got to know, who had sacrificed everything to ensure that her daughter survived. I kept my promise, Mother. I survived. I remembered. And I chose to save them. Not because they deserved it, but because holding on to rage and vengeance would have destroyed me as surely as it destroyed you. I chose to build instead of burn, to heal instead of hurt. And in doing so, I found something I never expected. I found home. I found love. I found purpose. And I found proof that even the deepest wounds can scar over if given time and care, and the genuine desire to be better. Theron wrapped his free arm around her waist, pulling her close, and together they watched the sun set over a kingdom that was still imperfect, but was trying, every single day, to be worthy of the second chance it had been given. And Kira knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, surrounded by people she loved and who loved her in return. The flames that had once been her curse had become her gift, and she wielded that gift not to destroy, but to illuminate the path forward for everyone brave enough to walk it. If you enjoyed this complete story of redemption, romance, and supernatural transformation, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more immersive storytelling, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Kira and Theron's journey. What moment resonated most with you? Would you have made the same choices they did? Your engagement helps us continue creating. These deep, meaningful stories that explore love, justice, and the possibility of change. Thank you for listening. And until next time, may you find the courage to face hard truths and build something better from the ashes of what came before.